This is a special weekend for many of us because this time of the year we honor one of the teachers, one of the gurus of this lineage, Lahiri Mahashai. I'm sure any of you that has read the autobiography of a yogi is very familiar with the life and teachings of Lahiri. And Thursday, I believe, was the day of his passing, the anniversary of his passing, and tomorrow happens to be his birthday. So we are honoring Lahiri this particular time of the year. And as I was sitting with this reading yesterday and the topic we are discussing, there couldn't be a more perfect topic or subject of discussion to think about and meditate on the life of Lahiri and what he brought, because this idea of one's own spiritual journey being so individual was the essence of Lahiri's teachings. Lahiri Mahashai, for those of you that don't know, he was a great guru who lived in India in the ancient city of Varanasi. He lived in the 1800s. He was initiated by Mahavatar Babaji, the great guru, into Kriya Yoga in the year 1861. And from then on, he lived a very, very humble life. Now, and he brought Kriya Yoga to the world. You know, in more ways than we imagine or realize. It might sound like an exaggeration, but it really isn't. Lahiri was a revolutionary beyond any proportion that we often recognize him to be. Because this idea of developing one's personal relationship with God for hundreds of years, perhaps thousands, has always been defined by formal religion. You know, how do you get closer to God? By being more religious. And here was a man as humble as humility could be, you know, just an accountant in the railways, and he was sitting there radiating his blessings, practicing Kriya Yoga, sharing it with a few that approached him, but he was bringing about a change in human civilization almost. You know, in this understanding and this idea that religion is not defined from outside, that your relationship with a higher reality is not just the rituals that you practice or what you agree with, what you believe in, but rather it is defined by inner experience. Your faith itself has to be grounded in what you can experience in your own practice to go within. And this, if today we are here thinking about this reading and Lahiri and all of this, and it seems fairly self-evident in the culture and the time that we live in. You know, I'm spiritual but not religious. Swami Kriyananda himself identified that way. So it feels a perfectly fine place to be, perhaps a better place to be than most other stands that one could take on this topic. But to think about the fact that in the 1800s, in 1862, when Lahiri was sitting in his tiny little home in Benares, it was not that way. It was not that way. There was only one way to get closer to God. That was to affiliate yourself with some religion. And it has been that way for, you know, as I said, hundreds or thousands of years. You know, we talk about ancient civilization, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Indus Valley civilization, and, you know, all the advancements of technology, of whatever they did. You know, they mined metal, they could purify copper, they had drainage systems, and they built the pyramids. But you know what is most common amongst all these civilizations, and what we don't talk about often enough, is the fact that they all worshipped. They all worshipped in some form, some way or the other. That was more common amongst them shared than anything else. They worshipped different things. They worshipped animals, they worshipped spirits, they worshipped nature, they worshipped their gods. The Egyptians apparently worshipped cats, which makes sense because they do feel worship-worthy in some ways, if you have had cats. But in a certain sense, faith is not a figment of imaginations. Historians and anthropologists might give a lot of reasons for why the human civilization has always sought to have religion, to have a conception of how you relate to a larger reality. But it is not merely a figment of human creation. It's not something that we create with our mind. It's a part of our existence. As soon as we exist and we express ourselves, it becomes self-evident that we have to connect with ourselves, and that relationship has to do with a higher reality because we are inherently connected with something greater. We are made to be something greater, and that pushes us from within to discover, to express it in all those different ways, and it leads to all these different varieties in which people express their own faith. The means of existence is what drives creatures everywhere, but as soon as that is set, the meaning of existence becomes the core of what drives us. And once you discover and latch onto that meaning, the means almost takes on a backseat. And that's really why, throughout all of this time, we always keep seeking, but often we start by seeking outside. And here there was this man, Lahiri Mahasaya, who was bringing these ancient techniques to show us that somewhere in there is this pursuit, there's this quest that you have to take on, that is inside. What you're looking for is, after all, not in the rules, in the rituals, in a temple, in a priest, or whatever it is that you think you will find this in. I was reminded of a conversation I had with a very dear friend of mine not too long back. This person, a very simple lady, she is a caretaker of one of the widow homes in Vrindavan. For those of you that may be aware of this, Ananda has this charitable work in this ancient Indian town called Vrindavan. It's a pilgrimage site. And we take care of over 2,000 widow mothers who are destitute, who have been abandoned by their families. They're all elderly. And I was talking to a dear friend of mine who's one of these caretakers. She's not very highly educated or anything, very simple-minded. She is a disciple of this path and also a Kriya Yogi. And she was sharing with me, she was showing the Janmashtami celebrations and how they put lights outside their ashram and all of that. And she was telling me, we did the same thing for Christmas. It didn't go that well. And immediately, this is a true story, immediately we started attracting the attention of certain political groups, people who generally are more on the right side of the spectrum. There's a lot of things happening all over the world, as all of us know. And whoever identified as, they had certain Hindu beliefs that they were quite attached to. And they had an issue with the fact that these people who had this ashram, it looked like an ashram until they put up lights for Christmas. And now they weren't sure what this place was. And actually, they started attracting some negative attention. A group of men, strong men, approached the ashram, and they started questioning them. Who are you? What are you trying to do here? Because there's this whole history in India where, a lot of the underprivileged, the poor and the destitutes, they are targeted for conversion into Christianity. And there's a lot of history around it, and it's not something that is very well received by a lot of people. So there were obviously some doubts, and there was some tension around what the intention of these ashrams were. And this particular ashram is run by Ananda, so we have pictures of these same gurus. And Jesus Christ being at the center of the altar, they have those pictures. And these men that walked into the ashram were not a fan of that. They were wondering, why is there Jesus? And then, this lady, she was so naive, and she started showing them, let me show you Krishna. Let me show you how big an altar we have for Krishna. And she was trying to convince them that they are, in fact, Hindus. And anyway, and finally, somehow they were convinced, and the whole thing went over fine, I believe. But then from then on, they did have some concerns over having pictures of Jesus in the ashram because of the sentiments that it might arouse or what kind of tensions it might create. The whole conversation was almost bittersweet because she was explaining to me in her own simplicity of thinking. The only answer she could give this man was, my guru taught me so. My guru is Yogananda. I worship Krishna, but my guru put Jesus on the altar too. That's why we have it here, which is just the perfect explanation anyway. But also, it sometimes hurts your heart to think that in this day and age, are people that narrow that they cannot just accept and see truth, that they cannot respect one's own devotion to God in whatever ways and forms in which it starts to express itself. And if you think about it again, just like civilizations worshiping whatever they worship for hundreds of years, I believe as soon as we all started worshiping, we also started disagreeing. We all started disagreeing on how faith should be expressed, of what truth should look like. And then there has been tension. It almost seems like we are past all of that, but not at all. It seems inherent in, again, that fabric of faith itself, that somehow, until we elevate ourselves, we transcend that limitation in some way. We understand, just as Lahiri Mahasaya taught, that this truth has to be sought within. Until we get to that point, we are in fact going to fight with each other. It is not pleasant or pleasing to think about that way, but it seems to be the truth that we keep disagreeing on these things. And the whole world, I'm giving this tiny microcosm of one town and one incident, but we all know in this whole world, so much of bigotry and sectarianism is all based on religion. It's all based on what do I believe in, what I think is true, and why I don't think you're right. And that becomes somehow this way in which we as a culture are constantly growing, and we are seeking that truth, but we are made to seek it in different ways. It feels like it's almost an incentive to do that. There's this odd little story from the life of Lahiri Mahasaya. Lahiri Mahasaya was born at a time, and he lived during this time in Varanasi. Varanasi is a very ancient town. And the northern part of India had the Mughals, the Muslims that came from Central Asia and who ruled that part of the country for a very long time. And there were, of course, the devout Hindus who have lived there for millennia. And although they lived in harmony and there were tensions, but also they all coexisted. I don't exactly know. I don't want to get into history right now. But all of them existed in very close quarters. They all had their roles and places in the society. And Lahiri had to navigate. And he had Hindu disciples. He also had Muslim disciples. He himself was a Brahmin. He was from a very pious Hindu family. And there's an odd little story with one of Lahiri's disciples. His name was Panchanan Bhattacharya. Panchanan was, one might say, he was the closest disciple to Lahiri. He spent most of his adult life in Lahiri's company. He came when he was a teenager, and pretty much he lived with Lahiri. He lived in Benares. He was from a different part of India. And Lahiri was very fond of him, and he was deeply in tune with his guru. One morning, he was taking a dip in the Ganges before dawn, and he was walking out of the river. And Panchanan had this ability. He was a spiritual giant. He was a great soul himself. And he could sense people's auras even before he could see them. So he started sensing this very, very evolved aura of a saint. And he could feel the presence of a very great saint. And the first thought that came to his mind was, who is this person? I've been living in Varanasi for a very long time, and I don't know who this is. I have never felt this aura before. I'm very curious. Maybe I need to bow down to him. This seems to be a very great soul spiritually. And immediately he starts pursuing this person, this aura. He couldn't even see this person. And he starts chasing him. In a couple of minutes, this realization pops in his head. You have your guru. Lahiri Mahasaya is God in human form. He's not just a saint. Why are you chasing someone else? Why are you pursuing somebody else at this time? And as soon as that thought came to him, he stopped. And then he went about his business. And then later in the day, he went to meet his guru, Lahiri Mahasaya. And Lahiri looked at him and said, so you couldn't grab a hold of him, could you? Of course, he knew. And as soon as Lahiri said that, Panchanan broke into tears. He started crying because he felt like he had fallen down in his attunement, in his desire and pursuit of something other than what his guru could offer. And then Lahiri Mahasaya, he sort of calms him down and lets him know it's okay, it's not a big deal. You don't know that is actually a disciple of mine that you felt. You just don't know him yet. And, Panchanan was, surprised to hear that. If he's a disciple of yours, how do I not know him? How have I not seen him before? And then Lahiri says, because he's a Muslim. Because, there were a lot of social rules during those times, and the story almost has an anticlimactic ending. But he says, this man is a Muslim, that's why you and he have never been in my house at the same time, because, whatever the social rules were, you couldn't share, or I don't quite fully know what it was like in the 1800s. And then Panchanan tells Lahiri, that's great, I'm happy to know. Now I have no desire to have to meet him. This desire that I had is already quenched in my heart. My lesson is learned, and I have no longer any feelings left. And this is the anticlimactic line. Then Lahiri looks at him and says, that's great. He doesn't want to meet any of you either. It is almost a funny story. But to think about the fact that even in the presence of a God-realized guru, somehow these human differences, the pettiness of this material plane and the way in which these things are set up, you would think that which is taking us closer to God was something a little more elevated, that it was not divisive, that it was bringing people together. And that truly is the motive of religion. Lahiri never defied religion. That was also one of the characteristic features of the way he taught. In fact, you might remember these lines from the autobiography of a yogi. Yogananda writes, Lahiri would only give Kriya Yoga initiation to those that practice their religion. Now, this has to be taken in context in 2024. A lot of people in our day and age grow up in a religion culturally, not necessarily in a spiritual sense. But some of us do, and there is a mix of both. But in those days, religion was not cultural. Religion was much more than that. Religion was part of identity. Religion was part of what guided your life, how you did everything that you did. And Lahiri lived during these times. And as great masters are, he never defied anything, because what he was teaching was transcendence. He didn't need to defy. He didn't need to disagree. He didn't need to flaunt or violate social norms. That was not necessary. His existence was so humble and quiet in this corner of Varanasi. Barely, you can walk through the streets of his home. The home where Lahiri Mahashaya lived is still there. You cannot go into the house except for one day in a year. But you just walk, the street itself, for those of you that have been there, it's about 4 feet wide. And, the entire home is probably smaller than this dais, and it had many rooms. So the rooms were tiny, perhaps a little larger than this dais, but all the rooms were so tiny. He wasn't standing on a podium. He wasn't going on lecture tours. He was radiating. He was radiating the power of these teachings. He was radiating the power of Kriya Yoga. And those that were meant to be drawn to him just came. And they didn't need to necessarily make a show of it either, because he was teaching them to get past all of this. He didn't need to violate, or he didn't need to speak against anything that was helping whoever it was helping. That faith, that expression was perhaps helping somebody. There is another very interesting story. There was this Bhairava temple in Varanasi. Those of you that are from India and that have been there know what I'm talking about. And every Saturday, Lahiri would visit this temple. And one of his disciples asked him once, "But Master, you are God. I have seen you in the Vishwanath temple. I see the idol of Vishwanath in you. Why would you go to the small temple every Saturday? What makes you go there? Why would you want to worship that idol when you are so beyond all of this?" And Lahiri's answer to that was so simple. He asked a question, in fact, rather than answering that. He asked this disciple, "If I don't go, would you?" And the masters come onto this plane to teach us by example, because God sends us gurus. Self-realized souls, those that are one with God, come onto this plane again and again to walk amongst us, to look like us. Lahiri couldn't look more like anybody else. He was an accountant. He had 2 kids. He was trying to make ends meet. His income was insufficient in order to raise his family, so he had to tutor kids in the evening in order to make more money so he could educate his children and he could get his daughters married. He did not resign his job after he learned Kriya Yoga or after he started sharing all of this. He just continued until he reached his retirement because he couldn't miss out on his pension. He needed that for his own survival. He never slept at night. In fact, his wife Kashimani describes how after he revealed his identity to her, he never laid down. He was just meditating all night. So disciples would often come to him at night. You wonder why? Because he was working during the day. He was an accountant during the day, but at night, that flower of Kriya was constantly radiating in his presence and from his heart, and it was drawing people from everywhere. And this idea of one's own spiritual journey being so individual, the seed was planted by the gurus, by Lahiri Mahashaya, in that home, in that place in Varanasi. And today we sit here in this temple, talking about all of this idea this understanding and realization that is so inherent in all of us, that outer form cannot be the definition of my spirituality. I have to find, this has to be authentic, this has to be true to my own experience. But the way we feel this way, because there were these gurus, there was this example, there was this clear demonstration that happened in the 1800s through Lahiri Mahasaya, where we could see those that lived with him, and through Yogananda, who came to the West, this Indian yogi dressed in orange garb, walking through the streets of Boston. Again, a spectacle in itself, to show that what he was talking about was not Indian or American or Western or Eastern or anything. It was just about truth. There's this very famous man. His name was John Tettemer. Many of you may have read this book. He became famous because he published his autobiography in the year, I think in the 1930s. He was perhaps a couple of decades older than Yogananda. And this book is called I Was a Monk. I was looking for the copy yesterday. I couldn't find it, but I have read this a while ago. And it's a very, very interesting story. John Tettemer was born in a very devout Catholic home in the 1800s, late 1800s. And he was very, very religious, even as a young boy. And he immediately found this affinity towards ceremonies and priesthood and the Catholic Church. He obviously made that his life. He entered the seminary in his teenage years. The earliest time he could enter a seminary, he immediately went there. And by his early 20s, he had already rose up the ranks. I don't remember all the ranks in the Catholic Church. All those words were, they're not part of my upbringing, but they were describing how he was in charge of so many priests. He had this position of authority. But as he kept going deeper and deeper in his own spiritual practice, he started having mystical experiences. He started seeing the inner light. He started developing a relationship with God that was true to himself. And as soon as that started happening, everything started falling apart. He couldn't relate to the Catholic rituals anymore. He couldn't do exactly what was told, and somehow some of it made sense, most of it did not. More than anything, the vibration of it, where it was resonating, it did not make sense to him. There are great saints like St. Francis, resurrected the Catholic Church. Padre Pio lived not too long ago. So it was not about the church itself. But Tettemer was having this spiritual awakening, and the whole setup and the vibration of the church was no longer resonating with him. And this was a boy from when he was very young. He knew what he was going to become. There was nobody more religious than him. He was the youngest in any position that he held, and he had this huge position of power and authority. And he wrote this letter. It's a beautiful letter that he wrote. How difficult this decision was for him to step away from identifying as a Catholic. He stepped away from the church pretty early on in his life when he was still young, and he stopped being a monk. He married. He had a wonderful life. He became a lot of things. He was an educator. He was an actor in movies. He did he played the role of monks and other spiritual figures in Hollywood, and he had a very, very interesting life. But it speaks so much to what we are talking about today, this courage to be able to tune into the intuition within, to always know and realize the spiritual path is your own. You're not on a schedule. You're not on a timeline. Nobody has laid out this road for you. We are all walking this for our own sake, in our own way, and that's what is most important. There are 7 billion people in this planet, or how many ever there are, and perhaps millions and billions of creatures everywhere. Each one of us, our soul is calling us to expand in a certain way, and we are charting our own path. We are all walking the spiritual path in a unique way, and how many ever souls there are, our journey has to be unique, each one as unique as another. I was reading some of the writings of Tettemer, and I thought I'll share just a few of his words. There is no greater hindrance to spiritual growth than the illusion of certainty. We cling to our beliefs, our doctrines, our dogmas because they give us a sense of security in a world that is often uncertain and frightening. But in doing so, we close ourselves off from the very thing that we are seeking, the truth. True spirituality requires that we let go of the need for certainty, that we embrace the mystery of life with all of its contradictions. Only when we are willing to live in the unknown can we begin to truly understand the nature of the divine. This journey of the soul is an inward one. It is a journey that cannot be mapped by others, for no one else has walked it before. Each of us must make our own way. Along the way, we will encounter many obstacles, fear, doubt, confusion, but these are the things that drive us deeper into the mystery of who we are and what we are meant to become. In the end, we find the answers we seek are not out there in the world of books, but within, in the quiet places of our own being where the soul speaks in silence. Of course, he was writing in the 30s, he was talking about books. Now you can talk about, it's not on TikTok, it's not on YouTube, it's not on Instagram, it's not in the next experience that we are seeking, but rather, at some point, we have to take all of that inspiration and internalize it. We often talk about the very first line in the autobiography of a yogi. The characteristic feature of the Indian culture has always been the search for eternal verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. And we talk about the second part of the disciple-guru relationship, but again, there's so much that Yogananda says. Just in that one line, the search for eternal verities. What drives us is the search for eternal verities, the truth, but not a truth that is susceptible to change. And that is where spirituality is born. And even for a moment, if we think this search for truth is somehow, it's exciting, yes it is, but it's just an adventure that we are on to know, to find out who we are, or to become something, or to figure something out. Don't be mistaken, because this search for truth, in a strange way, is a quest of the heart. It's also a quest for healing, because whenever we look for it through the mind, that answer, what he's talking about, that soul speaking in silence, one has to get past the mind even to hear that voice. It is the voice of intuition that is born when the heart is open. I've done a few astral ascension ceremonies here in Ananda. That's what we call our funeral service. It's not a very nice word, at least it doesn't bring up positive associations when you say funeral service. But the astral ascension was a ceremony that Swami Kriyananda wrote in order to honor souls that have passed, and for those that are remaining, in order for them to create the right relationship with both the event and the soul. And many of you that are here, I'm sure, have witnessed many of these occasions and ceremonies. And I remember many years ago, I was doing an astral ascension for somebody here on this dais. This was an acquaintance of somebody who had come here once, not a Kriya Yogi or a disciple of this path, and certainly those that had lost, whoever it was that left their body, they had nothing to do. They probably did not know who Yogananda was. They had not read the autobiography of a yogi. And here I was standing, I was thinking about it. It's a question that those of us that do these things often ask. Should I be praying to the gurus? Should I mention, Babaji, Lahiri Mahasaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar? How strange is it going to sound to these people here in this room? They're already grieving. I don't want to make this more confusing. But, in that moment, I thought I should. It just depends. It's subjective, depends upon who it is and what you feel. And, it sort of did not, it didn't catch anybody's attention. It sort of passed that moment. And even though, whether or not I was saying those names, I was trying to tune in, because these were people, many of them were in real pain and also a kind of confusion. What just happened? What is the purpose? What is the meaning of all of this? How am I supposed to feel? Why do I feel so empty? Why am I experiencing so much pain? What is my motivation in life? If this is what my experience is going to be. There is so much that comes up during a situation like that. But here is why I thought about that situation just right now, because all I remember from that event is how grateful they were and how comforted they felt. And many of them, this was their remark or comment once they were out of it, once when we were chatting, they were telling me, this was so perfect. This was so perfect. I'm not Christian. I don't affiliate myself with that. None of that would have made sense. We wanted something. We wanted something that would have meaning for us. And as I was beginning to say, that meaning is what we are all seeking in some way, and faith is an important part of our existence because it gives that meaning. It gives that purpose and context for what life is. And that is the eternal verity that Yogananda talks about. That is the eternal verity that we are seeking. It is that connection with truth itself that finally, after all of the pain and suffering, imparts meaning to our very life. And what they were sharing with me and what I was feeling is how much we all are seeking that and how individual it is. And we need these temples, we need this congregation, we need these opportunities to come together, to worship together, as humans have been doing for thousands of years. But ultimately, we also have to go back and realize that there is an answer within. All of this is supposed to guide us there. Swami Kriyananda was once attending a conference of cooperative communities, which were a thing, and there was a whole movement in the 60s and 70s, as those of you that were here might remember. And there were a lot of speakers on this panel, and he was one of those invited guests. And everybody thought he was going to speak about the importance of communities, of cooperative communities, and how they are the wave of the future. And of course, he has spoken about that at many times. But during this one occasion, he started with a very interesting remark. He said, "I'm not interested in communities. I am interested in them in as much as they help individuals deepen their connection with God. But that is the purpose of all of this. What you feel here, what we bring to a place of worship, what we bring to our own worship every day in whatever form or way we do, is our love of the heart, our sincerity, our seeking, our quest for truth. That is the essential ingredient. Without that, everything else is form, but also it is so purposeless. There is no meaning in any picture, in any altar, in any flowers, in any rituals, if it is not infused with that feeling of the heart, with our own sincere intention to get closer to a higher reality, to know for ourselves what is true. How do I heal? How do I discover my purpose? What am I here for? What am I looking for? And that is the drive, and that is the quest. And through these masters, through great masters everywhere, every saint who has walked on earth before these great gurus, and through Lahiri Mahashaya, through Yogananda, they keep answering this question to us. Go within, find it, and we will tell you how. Because a lot of people, it's almost a cliche, find it within. But how? And they come to teach us how you do that, how you still your mind, how you calm your heart. I want to end today by reading the small section from the autobiography of a yogi again, as we remember and honor Lahiri Mahashaya. These are Lahiri's words that I'll end with. Not Hindus only, but Muslims and Christians were among his foremost disciples. Monist, dualists, those of all faiths or of no established faith, were impartially received and instructed by the universal Guru. One of his highly advanced disciples was Abdul Ghaffar Khan, a Muslim. It shows great courage on the part of Lahiri Mahashaya that although a high-caste Brahmin, he tried his utmost to dissolve the rigid caste bigotry of his times. Those from every walk of life found shelter under the Master's omnipresent wings. Like all God-inspired prophets, Lahiri Mahashaya gave new hope to the outcasts and downtrodden of the society. Always remember that you belong to no one and no one belongs to you. Reflect that someday you will suddenly have to leave everything in this world, so make the acquaintanceship of God now, the great Guru told his disciples. Prepare yourself for the coming astral journey of death by daily riding in the balloon of God perception. Through delusion, you are perceiving yourself as a bundle of flesh and bones, which at best is a nest of troubles. Meditate unceasingly, that you may quickly behold yourself as the infinite essence, free from every form of misery. Cease being a prisoner of the body. Using the secret key of Kriya Yoga, learn to escape into spirit.
Sing of freedom as they soar lightly on. remote and still, hid in higher worlds unseen. So may our lives be soaring and serene.
Mother, we thank you, your joy shines in everything. Open these channels that the world once more may see.
Rivers seek passage unhindered by rock or tree. So may our lives flow steadfast towards the sea.
Mother, we thank you, your joy shines in everything. Open these channels that the world once more may see. Mother, we thank you, your joy shines in everything. Open these channels that the world once more may see.
Lived in many countries and mixed with many men. I've shared the days of sunshine, gone with them in the rain. The fires at evening said we were brothers. The fires at evening said we were brothers. A soldier I saw weeping beside a dying friend. My officers had said I must hate him till the end. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers. But seeing his grief I knew we were brothers.
A man sat on a doorstep to see the children play. The gentle way he smiled there would charm your fears away. A stranger he, but love made us brothers. A stranger he, but love made us brothers.
One day I climbed a mountain with friends of other lands.
The words we used were different, but joy one understands. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers. Our gladness in God's world made us brothers.
The words
And customs vary like waves upon the sea. But life beneath the surface binds everyone to me. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Who knows the truth knows all men as brothers. Then brothers, why endeavor to set ourselves apart? The fences we've been building squeeze tight upon our hearts. Come sing the truth that all men are brothers. Come sing the truth that